Good evening, boils and ghouls, and welcome to another episode of The Collectors, Friday Night Fable Frights, with me, your host with the most, The Collector. And every Friday night we dive into my collection of horror and pull out a little story guaranteed to keep you awake all night long. And tonight's tale of terror comes from J.B. Stamper's More Tales for the Midnight Hour, published in 1980. Get it? It's midnight. Published in 1987 by Scholastic Books, More Tales for the Midnight Hour is the second book in a collection of 4, each one containing 13 terrifying stories. And tonight's tale of terror is called The Shortcut. Shall we begin? People ask me why I've changed. They say I'm too quiet, too withdrawn. Some even say I've become a little strange. Well, it's true. I have changed. Ever since that night last summer. It had been a perfect summer day. I had gone swimming in a pond a few miles from my uncle's farm where I was staying for the month of July. A group of kids who lived in the nearby town were there too. After swimming, we bought some food and had a picnic in the park. Before I realized how late it was, the sky had started to grow dim with the twilight. The rest of the kids started for home in the town. I was the only one who had to ride the long way to my uncle's house. I raced my bike hard up the big hill outside town in the direction of the farm. By the time I got to the crest, I had to stop. I was so exhausted that my legs trembled. I stood still on top of the hill, alone on the road, with my bike leaning against me. I was too tired to go on, too tired to do anything but watch the setting sun. It had sunk so low that it looked like a huge, burning ball in the dark blue sky. Blood-red streaks shot out from it across the horizon. I shuddered suddenly and felt a chill pass through my body. It seemed I was the only person alive in the world. This part of the country was remote and lonely, and I wasn't familiar with it. Looking down the hill, I saw where the road split into 2 forks. I had driven down this hill with my uncle several times. He had taken the road to the right, which was hilly, and went past farmhouses. I knew it would be a long, hard ride to get home on that road. When I had asked my uncle about the road to the left, he had said it was a shortcut. Then he mumbled something about people never taking it. I couldn't remember exactly what he had said. All around me, the color of the sky deepened to a purplish black. The last red rays of the sunset had faded from the horizon. I knew I had to get back to my uncle's farm as fast as I could. I swung my leg over the bike and pushed off downhill. When the road split ahead of me, I took the left turn onto the shortcut. My bike shot down the old dirt road, raising a cloud of dust around me. In the dim light, I could see that there were no other tracks on the ground. I started to put on the brakes, suddenly wishing I had taken the more familiar road. Then I realized that I had been steadily coasting downhill. To turn back would mean climbing uphill again. I rode on down the deserted road. Finally, the ground leveled out, and I had to push on the pedals to keep up my speed. My legs ached, but I ignored the pain. I was flying down the road in almost total darkness now. The only light came from a thin moon that hung like a sickle in the black sky. Then, even that light was blotted out by a cloud that moved across the moon. At first, I couldn't sense where the road was in front of me, but slowly, my eyes, like a cat's, grew used to seeing in the dark. I followed the road that stretched like a ghostly ribbon through the darkness on both sides. Suddenly, the front wheel of my bike hit a hard bump. I struggled to keep it under control, gripping the handlebars so tightly that my hands ached. The clouds over the moon parted just then. Ahead of me, bathed in eerie moonlight, was an old graveyard. Standing in the middle of the white tombstones was the huge black shadow of a decaying house. A lump of fear rose in my throat. I started to pump my legs on the pedals as fast as I could. I drew nearer and nearer to the cemetery, but my bike seemed to be going slower and slower. Then, through the panic in my mind, the truth came to me. The front tire of my bike was losing air. Its slow, hissing sound mocked me as I struggled uselessly to pedal forward on the road. The bike slowed down to a crawl, then it came to a total stop right in front of the graveyard. I looked at the white tombstones lined up like soldiers in the moonlight. They seemed to stare back at me with curious, sinister eyes hidden in their cold marble. For a minute I thought about running away, leaving my bike behind, but I forced myself to stoop down and inspect the front wheel. As I had feared, all the air had leaked out. I heard a noise behind me, a strange rattling noise coming from the cemetery. I jumped to my feet and cowered against the bike. Again I considered running, but then all was deadly silent. I reached down and pulled the air pump from the crossbar of my bike. My hands were shaking, and I dropped the pump against the metal spokes of the back wheel. The noise echoed from one tombstone to another as I bent to pick it up. Still trembling, I found the tire valve and fastened the pump onto it just in time, for then the moon disappeared behind the clouds again, and I was left in total darkness. I started the pump, afraid to think what I would do if it didn't work, but it did work. The air went in and out, sounding like heavy breathing. I was breathing hard too, my breath coming in short gasps. Then suddenly I stopped. The sound, the same rattling sound that I had heard before, came from behind me again. The pump hissed louder and louder as I worked it harder, but the rattling grew louder and louder too. It was coming toward me, closer and closer, through the black night. I had to escape whatever was making that horrible sound. I pulled the pump off the tire and threw it on the ground by the graveyard. Jumping up, I started to swing my leg over the bike. Then I felt something that made my blood run cold. 5 sharp points were stroking the top of my head. They seemed to dig into my brain. I tried to tell myself that it was the branch of a tree, but the 5 points began to move down toward my neck. My legs were numbed with fear, but I forced them onto the pedals. Then, with one great lunge of fear, I shot forward on the road. Whatever had been reaching for my neck was gone now. I had escaped its horrid grip. The bike flew through the darkness, leaving the tombstones to stare at my fleeing back. My body felt as cold as death. Still, my legs worked automatically, pushing the pedals up and down, carrying me away from whatever had touched me in front of the cemetery. I shot through the darkness, going as fast as I could, until my front tire hit another bump. I kept control of the wheels, but a sickening fear spread through my mind. The sound, that horrid, rattling sound, was still right behind me. I pumped harder and harder on the pedals. My breath came in short, painful gasps. I rode on for several minutes, thinking I was safe. Then I heard it again, the rattling. I was afraid to turn around, afraid to see what was chasing me down the dark, lonely road. Time and time again, the rattling sounded behind me. It played on my nerves, until I thought I would descend into madness and never return. Finally, in the moonlight, I caught sight of my uncle's farm. I turned onto the road that led up to his house. He was standing in front, gazing down the road, waiting for me. As soon as I saw him, I tried to tell myself that it had all been my imagination. The staring tombstones, the strange rattling. I rode my bike up to where he stood and jumped off, breathing so desperately that I couldn't speak. I waited for him to say something, but instead, a look of horror came over his face. He was staring at the seat of my bike. Trembling, I turned around. There, clamped onto the back of the seat, in a grisly death grip, was the rattling, bony hand of a skeleton. So there you go, kids. A little bit of life advice. Sometimes, even though taking the shortcut might be handy, handy. It all just comes down to what hand is giving you the help. So, until next time, make sure you stay tuned for another Friday Night Fable Fright. And good night out there, whatever you are.